Ever wonder what happens when the people who erased you suddenly roll out the red carpet on Christmas Eve for 12 years? My parents wiped me from their empire because I chose dirt over champagne. When that desperate invitation arrived last December, they thought I was coming to make peace. I actually came to watch their legacy burn. What I mailed them after dinner was the final blow. Listen closely. Perfect revenge is never loud. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Recently, YouTube has completely disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the operating budget to keep the channel running. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting our dedicated team with just $1 by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description or comments, so we can pay our staff and continue bringing these stories to life. My name is Hope Franklin. I am 32 years old, and right now, the bone-chilling wind of a Montana winter is biting straight through my worn canvas jacket. My hands are stained with dark, stubborn machine oil from fixing a broken tractor, and my hair carries the permanent, earthy scent of wet hay and sweet feed. This is my entire world. I am the founder and operator of the Oak and Iron Equine Sanctuary. It is a harsh refuge for broken things. We take in the horses that the rest of the world has discarded, the ones deemed entirely useless, and we give them a second chance at breathing the crisp, unfiltered air of the Bitterroot Valley. It is hard, unrelenting work, grounded in mud, sweat, and freezing rain. It is a reality so raw and unpolished that it would make the delicate, manicured skin of Seattle's high society crawl in disgust. That is exactly why the piece of mail sitting on my splintered wooden desk feels like a sick, twisted joke. Nestled offensively among a stack of wrinkled feed invoices and muddy veterinary bills is a thick, cream-colored envelope. It is made of heavy sheepskin parchment, the kind of stationery that costs more than a week of my groceries. The return address is embossed in an arrogant, glittering gold foil. It reads, Nova Peak Ventures, the towering corporate crown jewel belonging to my parents, Richard and Evelyn Franklin. I wipe a thick streak of grease from my thumb onto my denim jeans before breaking the red wax seal. Inside the expensive casing, there is an invitation to the annual Franklin family Christmas dinner, accompanied by a first-class boarding pass from Missoula directly to Seattle. The glossy cardstock feels entirely foreign and alien against my heavily calloused fingertips. I stare blindly at the printed flight itinerary. It has been 12 long years since I was last allowed to set foot inside their sprawling, glass-fronted mansion overlooking Puget Sound. 12 years of absolute, punishing silence. To understand the terrifying gravity of this invitation, you have to understand the Franklins. My parents do not have a family. They have a diversified portfolio. Every December, they uphold a rigid, suffocating holiday tradition. They publish the annual family report, a heavily curated manifesto disguised as a warm holiday newsletter. It is mailed out to 500 elite business partners, powerful senators, and tech moguls. It always features a staged, flawless family photograph, designed to project an image of absolute perfection and dynastic power. 12 years ago, I committed the ultimate, unforgivable sin against that dynasty. I was supposed to attend an Ivy League law school, marry a junior corporate partner, and become another gleaming asset in their financial empire. Instead, I packed a single canvas duffel bag, moved to the harsh wilderness of Montana, and chose to work with my bare hands. I chose dirt over their vintage champagne. The retaliation was swift, brutal, and absolute. I was permanently cropped out of the annual family photograph. I was erased from their public narrative. I still vividly remember the freezing tone of my mother's voice the day I left. She stood in the grand foyer, casually adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet, and looked at my scuffed boots as if they were tracking poison across her imported Italian marble floor. She delivered her verdict without blinking a single time. A horse-dung cleaner cannot stand in the same frame as the architects of the future. Those were her final words to me. From that day forward, my existence was classified as a failed investment, entirely written off and buried in the past. So, As the relentless Montana wind howls against the frosted windows of my barn office, a stark contradiction sits right in front of me. Why would the architects of the future suddenly lower themselves to send a first-class ticket to their greatest failure? My parents do not experience nostalgia. They do not practice forgiveness. Every warm smile is a calculated transaction, and every invitation is a subpoena in disguise. They consider my life out here a disgusting stain on their spotless legacy. They would never invite me back into their pristine home unless they were desperate, unless they needed something that only I possessed. A sharp, cold intuition washes over me, chilling my blood more effectively than the winter air. The scent of expensive paper and cheap emotional manipulation is heavy in the room. I drop the golden envelope onto the desk and walk purposefully over to the locked metal filing cabinet hidden in the corner. I turn the brass key, slide open the heavy bottom drawer, and reach past the stacks of animal medical records. My fingers brush against a thick manila folder. Inside is a highly classified legal contract, a document I have kept buried in absolute secrecy for 3 long years. The crisp, heavily notarized pages detail an arrangement that no one in Seattle sees coming. I pull the folder out and run my hand over the plain cover. A slow, dark smile creeps onto my face. I do not need to guess their sudden motives. I know exactly why my parents have called me home for Christmas. The thick manila folder in my hands feels much heavier than its few dozen pages should realistically allow. It smells faintly of aged parchment and dried lavender, the exact comforting scent that always used to linger in my grandmother Eleanor's kitchen. Eleanor was the absolute anomaly in the rigid, calculating Franklin bloodline. While my parents relentlessly measured a person's worth by their stock portfolio and their exclusive zip code, my grandmother measured it by the calluses on their palms and the unbreakable integrity of their spoken word. She was the original owner of this sprawling 200-acre sanctuary nestled deeply within the rugged Bitterroot Valley. She bought it decades ago, long before the technological boom turned our family into insufferable, modern-day aristocrats. Eleanor always preferred the quiet, honest company of grazing livestock and the unpredictable temper of the mountain weather over the hollow. Echoing clink of crystal champagne glasses at high society charity galas. She lived her life in faded flannel shirts and scuffed leather riding boots, her long silver hair usually tied back with a simple piece of worn twine. But beneath that gentle, fiercely rustic exterior lay an incredibly sharp, uncompromising mind. My grandmother possessed a cunning intellect that easily rivaled the most ruthless corporate sharks in my parents' elite social circle. She saw right through Richard and Evelyn. She recognized their insatiable greed and the disturbing way they viewed everyone, including their own biological daughter, as mere pawns on a grand financial chessboard. When I made the terrifying decision to walk away from the Ivy League pipeline 12 years ago, Eleanor was the only family member who did not scream in my face or threaten to financially destroy me. Instead, she met me in secret at a small, dimly lit diner on the edge of town, slid a steaming mug of black coffee across the sticky laminate table, and gave me her total blessing. "Run fast, and do not ever look over your shoulder," she had whispered to me, her bright eyes shining with a fierce, protective pride. "They will try to buy your soul. Hope, do not ever let them afford it." She offered me a quiet refuge here on her land, allowing me to slowly build my sanctuary while the rest of the world assumed I was just wandering aimlessly through life. 3 years ago, when Eleanor's health rapidly began to fail her, she knew exactly what would happen the very moment she took her last breath. She knew her daughter and son-in-law would swoop down upon this valley like starving vultures. They would arrive armed with high-paid corporate attorneys, completely ready to liquidate this sacred piece of Montana wilderness just to pad their offshore bank accounts. So, my grandmother executed an absolute masterstroke of legal defense. Eleanor intentionally did not leave a traditional last will and testament. She knew a standard inheritance document could be easily contested, dragged out in probate court for decades, and eventually dismantled by my parents' seemingly endless financial resources. Instead, she sat down with a retired, incredibly sharp-witted estate lawyer who owed her an old favor. Together, they quietly formed an airtight shell corporate entity. They named it Ironclad Horizon, a limited liability company protected by an impenetrable fortress of privacy clauses. Months before she passed away, Eleanor legally transferred the entire deed of the 200-acre farm directly into the private holding of Ironclad Horizon. She did this completely under the radar, leaving no financial footprints. When she died, the public county records simply showed the farm entangled in a confusing, highly ambiguous state of probate. To the outside world, and specifically to the predatory eyes of my parents in Seattle, the land appeared to be locked in an indefinite legal limbo, owned by a faceless corporation with absolutely no clear beneficiary. What they did not know, and what they still do not realize to this day, is that I am the sole proprietor of Ironclad Horizon. I hold 100% of the corporate shares, secured tightly behind a rigorous non-disclosure agreement that even a federal judge would struggle to unseal. For the past 3 years, I have lived and worked on this land under the official legal guise of a simple, month-to-month tenant. I officially pay a modest monthly rent to Ironclad Horizon, effectively paying myself in a loop, while keeping my actual name entirely off the local property records. If my parents sent their expensive private investigators to snoop around my life, and I know for a fact they have, all they would find is their estranged daughter leasing a rundown piece of dirt from an anonymous, unreachable landlord. Yet, this piece of dirt is the exact reason I am holding a first-class ticket to Seattle. My parents are not suddenly looking at this land because they care about my living conditions. They have discovered a massive secret hidden beneath the soil. To the untrained eye, my sanctuary is just endless. Rolling fields of overgrown sagebrush, aging wooden stables, and rocky, unforgiving earth. However, this specific tract of land sits directly on top of the Bitterroot Aquifer. It is the single largest untampered underground water source in the entire northwestern region. Recently, a powerful consortium of international billionaires announced the construction of a massive ultra-luxury ski resort just over the mountain ridge. They have secured the zoning permits, they have the corrupt political backing, but they are missing one critical, non-negotiable component. They do not have access to running water. The only geographic way to access that water is through the land currently sitting safely beneath the hooves of my rescue horses. The dirt itself might be practically worthless to a developer, but the exclusive water rights attached to this exact 200-acre parcel are valued at tens of millions of dollars. My parents do not want to reconcile. They want to steal the liquid gold flowing silently beneath my feet. I do not operate entirely in the dark. While my hands are usually busy wrapping bandages around the injured legs of rescue horses, I keep a very close watch on the corporate chessboard of the West Coast. A few months ago, when the quiet whispers of the new ski resort development first started circulating through the local town hall, I anticipated a storm. I used a portion of my personal savings to hire a fiercely independent forensic accountant based out of Chicago. I asked him to run a deep, untraceable background check on Nova Peak Ventures. I needed to know exactly what kind of monster might be waking up when they realized the value of my grandmother's land. The dossier he sent back to me a few weeks later was a breathtaking masterpiece of absolute corporate catastrophe. Nova Peak Ventures is bleeding out from a fatal wound. For the past 2 years, my father poured the absolute majority of their liquid capital and a terrifying amount of their clients' money into a revolutionary artificial intelligence startup. It promised to completely optimize global shipping logistics. There was only one massive problem. The technology did not actually exist. It was a highly sophisticated, beautifully packaged Ponzi scheme dressed up in silicon and venture capital buzzwords. When the startup inevitably collapsed a few months ago, the resulting shockwave took all of Nova Peak's credibility with it. Now, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission is aggressively auditing their entire portfolio for systemic fraud. My parents are currently staring down the barrel of crushing federal fines and a catastrophic mountain of debt. If they do not inject tens of millions of dollars of liquid cash into their accounts before the end of the fiscal year, everything they have ever built will be annihilated. The bank will foreclose on the sprawling glass mansion. The repo men will seize the 90-foot yacht moored in the private marina. The elite society that my mother worships with a religious fervor will permanently lock them out of their country clubs and charity galas. They are not the invincible titans they pretend to be. They are terrified, cornered animals hiding their panic behind $10,000 tailored suits. In a blind, sweating panic, my father began frantically clawing through old family assets, searching desperately for anything he could quickly liquidate to save his own skin. That is exactly when his sharp corporate nose caught the scent of the new mega resort project in Montana. He suddenly remembered Eleanor's garbage land, believing he was the sole, uncontested legal heir to a woman who died without a public will. Richard unleashed a vicious swarm of high-priced corporate lawyers and private investigators to seize the property. He planned to swiftly sell the water rights to the resort developers and instantly wipe out his massive debts. But his expensive legal hounds ran full speed into a reinforced brick wall. They collided head-on with ironclad Horizon. When the lawyers started digging into the corporate registration of the shell company, trying to find a vulnerability they could exploit, they uncovered a terrifying reality. They discovered that the only authorized managing member, the single human being on this entire earth with the legal power to sign away the deed, was me. They could not drag me into a courtroom. My grandmother's legal fortress was absolutely bulletproof. If Richard attempted to sue me for control, the ensuing public legal battle would freeze the asset in litigation for several years. The resort developers would simply walk away and find another location, and my parents would officially go bankrupt long before the judge struck the gavel. They realized they could not use the law to force my hand. Therefore, they had to use a much dirtier, far more insidious weapon. They had to use family ties. I can picture the exact moment they hatched their sickening plan. They likely sat in their sprawling, dimly lit dining room, nursing glasses of expensive scotch, and calculated exactly how to manipulate the psychological vulnerabilities of a daughter they had systematically abandoned. They arrogantly assumed I was out here freezing, miserable, and desperate for any tiny scrap of parental affection. They actually believed that a shiny first-class ticket and a warm, loving embrace would instantly erase 12 years of cruel, punishing silence. The strategy they established is devastatingly simple and entirely ruthless. They intend to lure me back to Seattle, wrap me in a suffocating blanket of fake remorse, and play the roles of the heartbroken, reformed parents. They will pour me expensive vintage wine, tell me how proud they are of my rugged independence, and wait patiently until the alcohol and the overwhelming emotion of the holidays soften my guard. Then, right after dessert, my father will casually slide a stack of paperwork across the dining table. He will dismiss it with a warm smile as a boring, routine family tax update regarding my grandmother's old estate, claiming it is just a minor formality that needs my quick signature to keep the government off their backs. It will be the deed transfer, hidden beneath layers of confusing legal jargon. It will be the document that strips me of ironclad Horizon and hands them the keys to a multi-million-dollar salvation. They honestly think they are laying out a perfect, foolproof trap for a naive, desperate farm girl. They have absolutely no idea that they are inviting the executioner to dinner. The massive oak doors of the Seattle estate open, and I step directly into a blinding theater of crystal and gold. I intentionally did not change my clothes after the flight. I am wearing my heavily scuffed, weather-beaten leather work jacket. The thick soles of my steel-toed boots are still caked with a fine layer of dried Montana mud. With every deliberate step I take across the pristine, imported Italian marble floor, my boots leave a faint, dusty footprint. The contrast is violently deliberate. I am a walking, breathing piece of the dirt they so deeply despise, standing right in the center of their immaculate, temperature-controlled sanctuary. My mother, Evelyn, glides down the sweeping grand staircase. She is draped in a floor-length emerald silk gown, looking absolutely flawless, as if she has spent the last 12 years perfectly preserved in a glass display case. She opens her arms wide, her face stretched into a smile so incredibly tight it looks like it might snap her jawbone. "Hope, my darling, look at you," she coos. wrapping her thin, heavily perfumed arms around my shoulders. The suffocating scent of her exclusive, custom-blended floral perfume fiercely battles the lingering smell of saddle leather and engine oil on my skin. She pulls back, holding my hands in hers. "You look so incredibly strong, so capable." Her words drip with a sugary sweetness, but her pale blue eyes betray her entirely. As her gaze drops to my heavily calloused fingers, taking in the permanently dirt-stained nails and the jagged white scars crisscrossing my knuckles, a micro-expression of absolute revulsion flickers across her face. She drops my hands almost immediately, as if she has just touched something diseased, quickly wiping her own palms down the sides of her expensive silk dress. My father, Richard, enters from the formal dining room. He is wearing a tailored, charcoal gray suit that probably costs more than my entire annual feed budget for the farm. He plays his assigned role perfectly. He offers a solemn, deeply regretful nod, stepping forward to firmly grip my shoulder. "Welcome home. Hope, we have missed you more than you could possibly know," he says, his voice vibrating with a carefully manufactured, fatherly warmth. The dining table is a staggering display of excessive wealth. Towering silver candelabras cast a flickering, nervous light over delicate porcelain plates and razor-sharp crystal wine glasses, as we sit down to a multi-course dinner prepared by a silent, invisible private chef. The psychological warfare officially begins. The air in the room is impossibly thick, filled with suffocating, carefully orchestrated silences and layered dialogue. "It must be incredibly difficult, living out there all alone," my mother remarks, delicately slicing a tiny piece of roasted pheasant. "The harsh winters, the manual labor, it is certainly not a life meant for a Franklin." "It is exactly the life I built," I reply evenly, taking a slow sip of the deep red vintage Cabernet. I find that animals are much more honest than people. When a horse wants to bite you, it simply bares its teeth. It does not smile first. A profound, incredibly tense silence drops over the table. The sharp clinking of silverware against porcelain completely stops. My father clears his throat, smoothly stepping in to steer the narrative back to his carefully rehearsed script. "Hope, I want to be entirely transparent with you tonight," Richard begins, folding his hands together in a practiced gesture of emotional vulnerability. "I was far too rigid in the past. I let my intense expectations for the company blind me to what my own daughter actually needed. I was completely wrong, and I want to spend the rest of my life making up for that terrible mistake." He pauses, letting his completely fabricated confession hang in the heavy air. "We know all about your sanctuary. We know you are struggling to keep the lights on and feed those animals. Your mother and I want to offer you a massive gesture of goodwill. We want to establish a private grant, $500,000, transferred directly to your rescue operation by the end of the week. No strings attached regarding how you spend it. We simply want our family to be unified again, especially during these challenging economic times." There it is, the bait, $500,000, to a struggling farm girl. It sounds like an unbelievable, life-saving fortune. To a man currently drowning in tens of millions of dollars of fraudulent debt, it is a pathetic, desperate bargain. They are trying to buy my grandmother's water rights for pennies on the dollar, masking their theft as an act of parental charity. The plates are quietly cleared away. The rich, heavy dessert is served and quickly ignored by everyone. The crystal chandeliers above us suddenly dim slightly, an automated setting designed to create a more intimate, serious atmosphere. The mood instantly shifts from a welcoming family reunion to a high-stakes corporate boardroom negotiation. My father casually reaches down beside his chair and lifts a sleek black alligator leather briefcase onto the polished mahogany table. His movements are terrifyingly smooth, practiced perfectly to appear entirely natural. The metallic snap of the briefcase latches echoes through the silent dining room like a gunshot. He extracts a thick, densely printed stack of legal documents and slides them gently across the table until they stop right next to my empty dessert plate. The tension in the room skyrockets. making it genuinely hard to pull oxygen into my lungs. My mother completely stops breathing, her eyes locked onto the papers like a starving predator watching its prey. My father reaches into his breast pocket and slowly pulls out a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc fountain pen. He clicks the cap off and places the expensive writing instrument deliberately on top of the signature line. The gold casing gleams sharply under the dim overhead light, a blinding beacon of corporate deception. "This is just a simple formality," Richard says softly, his voice dripping with a comforting, hypnotic cadence. "We need to clear up some lingering tax headaches from your grandmother's estate. It is constantly tying up our accountants. Just sign right here on the bottom line. Hope, and we will finally be a perfect family again." I do not reach for the gleaming gold pen. I do not even look at the stack of heavily worded legal documents resting next to my dessert plate. Instead, I calmly reach for my perfectly pressed white linen napkin. I unfold it with deliberate, agonizing slowness, gently dab the corners of my mouth, and place it neatly beside my crystal water goblet. I pick up my glass of vintage Cabernet, take a very slow, appreciative sip, and let the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out across the dining room. The silence deepens, thickens, and rapidly drops the temperature in the room. What was supposed to be a warm, triumphant moment of reconciliation for them transforms into a freezing, suffocating chamber of ice. I look directly into my father's eyes. I do not blink. I hold his gaze until the confident, paternal warmth completely drains from his face, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. $42 million, I say. My voice is flat, devoid of any emotion whatsoever. My father physically recoils, as if I have just slapped him across the face. "That is the exact amount of toxic debt Nova Peak Ventures is currently suffocating under," I continue, my words cutting through the tense air like a scalpel. "That number does not even include the upcoming financial penalties from the Securities and Exchange Commission, which are currently being finalized while you sit here pretending to care about my rescue horses." My mother stops breathing entirely. Her manicured fingers grip the stem of her wine glass so tightly, her knuckles turn completely stark white. "And then there is the other number," I say, shifting my gaze to her pale, terrified face. $35 million. That is the precise, confidential offer the International Ski Resort Consortium secretly placed on the table for the exclusive water rights attached to Ironclad Horizon, the exact same water rights you are currently trying to steal from me in exchange for a pathetic $500,000 bribe disguised as parental charity. The carefully constructed, 12-year-old facade violently shatters. The delicate crystal wine glass slips from my mother's trembling fingers. It hits the imported marble floor with a sharp, explosive crash, sending a dark red pool of expensive wine bleeding across the pristine white stone like a fresh wound. My father's face undergoes a terrifying transformation. The blood aggressively rushes to his cheeks, turning his skin a dark, mottled crimson, before instantly draining away, leaving him a sickly, ghostly gray. The mask of the loving, regretful father completely melts off his skull, revealing the desperate, cornered corporate shark underneath. "You arrogant, ungrateful little wretch," he spits, the venom in his voice finally unleashed. He slams both of his fists down onto the heavy mahogany table so hard the silver candelabras violently shake. "We gave you everything. We built an empire for you, and you threw it away to shovel dirt. You are absolutely nothing without the Franklin name." He pushes his chair back violently, standing up to tower over the table, his chest heaving with uncontrolled, frantic rage. "Do you honestly think you can walk in here and outsmart me?" he roars, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "I will absolutely destroy you. I will tie that worthless piece of land up in endless litigation until you are completely bankrupt. I will call every judge, every zoning commissioner, and every politician in Montana. I will have your pathetic animal sanctuary condemned, bulldozed, and paved over. You will sign those papers. Hope, or I will ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a gutter." I do not flinch. I do not raise my voice to match his frantic screaming. Anger is a profound weakness, and they are currently bleeding it from every pore. I slowly push my chair back and stand up, towering over their shattered illusions. I reach into my worn leather jacket, pull out the glossy first-class boarding pass they sent me, and toss it onto the pile of legal documents. That land belongs to a woman who actually knew the meaning of integrity, I say, my voice dropping to a low, absolute whisper that demands total attention. It will never, under any circumstances, be sold to liquidate the debts of pathetic corporate fraudsters. I turn on my heel and begin walking toward the grand foyer. My mother suddenly bursts into a hysterical, sobbing wail, begging me to come back, completely abandoning her aristocratic dignity. My father continues to scream toxic, vicious threats at my back, his voice cracking under the weight of his impending financial doom. I do not stop walking. I do not look back. Let them scream. Let them panic. They believe I just walked away from a fight, completely unaware that I am still guarding the most devastating, catastrophic secret of all. The final blow has not even landed yet. The flight back to Montana is a journey from a suffocating hell back into absolute clarity. When my heavy boots finally hit the frozen, snow-covered dirt of the sanctuary, the profound, unbroken silence of the Bitterroot Valley wraps around me like a protective armor. It is a stunning, jarring contrast to the hysterical, venomous screaming I left echoing in that glass and marble mausoleum in Seattle. Out here, there are no fragile crystal chandeliers waiting to shatter, and no silk-dressed socialites plotting my financial demise. There is only the biting winter wind, the sharp scent of fresh pine, and the steady, comforting breathing of the majestic animals I have sworn to protect. I do not go to my own cabin. Instead, I walk directly to the original farmhouse and step into my grandmother Eleanor's old study. The room has remained completely untouched since the day she took her final breath. I walk with deliberate purpose over to the heavy, antique cast iron safe bolted firmly to the oak floorboards. I spin the cold metal dial, carefully entering the combination she taught me when I was just a runaway teenager seeking refuge. The heavy steel door swings open with a low, satisfying groan. Inside, resting perfectly on the top shelf, is a thick, meticulously organized stack of legal documents I finalized several months ago. I take them out, feeling the incredible weight of absolute, undeniable power resting in my palms. I do not place these papers in a custom-embossed, gold foil envelope. I slide them unceremoniously into a cheap, standard brown cardboard mailer. I write my parents' Seattle address in plain black ink. I drive my rusted pickup truck down to the local town post office and send the parcel out with priority overnight shipping and strict delivery tracking. Then, I go right back to my life. I calmly brew a pot of intensely dark, bitter coffee. I walk out to the main barn, find the oldest, most weathered blind rescue horse in my care, and spend hours quietly brushing his thick winter coat. I do not feel anxious. I do not feel vengeful. I feel an overwhelming, profound sense of peace. I am simply watching the clock, waiting patiently for the final domino to fall. Exactly 48 hours later, as the bright morning sun reflects blindingly off the fresh snow outside my window, my cell phone vibrates violently against the wooden kitchen table. The screen lights up with a Seattle area code. I let it ring 3 times before I casually swipe the screen and lift the speaker to my ear. I do not say a single word. The voice on the other end of the line does not belong to the arrogant, untouchable corporate titan who slammed his fists on a mahogany dining table just 2 nights ago. It is the sound of a man who is actively drowning. Richard's breathing is ragged, incredibly shallow, and choked with absolute, paralyzing terror. "Hope," he gasps, his voice trembling so violently he can barely form the syllable. "Hope, what is this? What did you just send me?" This is the exact moment the final layer of my grandmother's brilliant, devastating master plan is finally revealed. Eleanor did not simply put the farm into a shell company to hide it from her greedy family. She was far more dangerous and far more protective than that, decades ago. before the technological boom, before the resort developers ever looked at this valley. Eleanor sold a very small, isolated fraction of her water rights to the state for an absolutely astronomical sum of cash. She took that massive fortune and quietly established an aggressive, entirely anonymous financial holding firm. When Nova Peak Ventures began drowning in toxic debt and fraudulent loans last year, the major banks desperately tried to offload my parents' failing mortgages to anyone who would buy them. My grandmother's anonymous holding firm, which I now own completely and totally, stepped out of the shadows. Over the last 8 months, I used that firm to quietly purchase every single one of Nova Peak's bad loans, every outstanding corporate debt, and the primary mortgage on their sprawling Seattle estate. I did not just refuse to sell my land to save them. The documents currently trembling in my father's shaking hands prove that legally. I am now their single largest creditor. I own their disgraced investment fund. I own their luxury vehicles. I own the imported marble floor my mother spilled her expensive wine on. I own their entire miserable future. Through the receiver, I can clearly hear the chaotic, pathetic sound of my mother screaming and violently sobbing in the background, finally realizing that the daughter she threw away like garbage is now the sole master of her destiny. My father tries to speak, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. "Hope, please. We are your family. You cannot do this to us. I am begging you." I let a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I do not feel a single ounce of pity. I interrupt his pathetic groveling with a calm, utterly emotionless tone. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Franklin," I say softly, letting the absolute finality of my words crush whatever fragile hope he has left. "Remember to pack your things and be out of my house before the end of the month." I pull the phone away from my ear, completely cutting off his frantic, desperate screaming, and toss the device casually onto the kitchen table. The screen fades to black. It is finished. I grab my heavy coat, step out onto the wooden porch, and take a deep, cleansing breath of the freezing, pristine air. The very first snowflakes of the season are beginning to fall from the pale gray sky, landing softly on the vast, untamed wilderness that belongs entirely and permanently to me. Thank you so much to everyone who has stayed with me through this entire journey. I would truly love to know where you are listening to this story from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help keep this channel alive, please consider supporting our hardworking team with just a $1 donation. You can simply scan the QR code right here on your screen or click the donation link down in the description or the pinned comment. Your support allows us to pay our staff, help them feed their families, and continue creating these incredible stories for you every single week. Stay strong and never let anyone dictate your worth.